All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all speakers and participants. I think we have some folks dialing in from different parts of the world. My name is Wei Guo Tang from Singapore, and I'll be moderating this session this afternoon. So as agreed at the 9th triennial review of the TBT agreement, the purpose of this session is really more to share information on member and stakeholders' views on cybersecurity regulation with a view to promote application of regulatory approaches in accordance to the core TBT principles to maximize security, trade, and innovation outcomes while minimizing unnecessary barrier to trade in goods. So the topic of this thematic session will focus really on cybersecurity, regulatory cooperation between members on cybersecurity. And this is very timely for the following reasons. So first, we have seen members notifying around 80 cybersecurity related measures to the TBT committee. And this is clearly a very new trend because the vast majority of these were only notified since 2020. And such notifications actually dealt with a wide range of products and situations, including the cybersecurity of Internet of Things, 5G technology, telecommunication, vehicles, and radio equipment, just to name a few. And around half of these measures indicate that they have been proposed or adopted for the protection of national security interests. Second, I think in recent years, WTO members have also increasingly used the TBT committee to raise and discuss specific trade concerns with cybersecurity related measures. So the TBT measures subject to these STCs regulate, for instance, like I mentioned just now, ICT products, network equipment, vehicles, banking and insurance. So it's really quite cross-sectoral. And to date, members have raised at least 26 of such STCs, the majority of which more than 60% during the last 6 years. And these discussions are really important, not only because of the nature of the topic, but in terms of getting us understand where each member is coming from. So I hope today's session will really help us better understand the role of regulation, standards, and conformity assessment procedures in members' cybersecurity related policies. I hope that we will learn more about members' experiences in managing cybersecurity risk and explore opportunities for regulatory cooperation in this area. So you can check out the details of the program for this session on our webpage. It's largely segmented in 3 parts. The first part, we'll be getting IEC to give us an overview on the general landscape of cybersecurity issues. And in this context, they would be talking about the role of standards and regulations in managing cybersecurity risk. The second part, we will be hearing from the private sector and industry associations. And we'll have 3 speakers who will share with us their insights and experiences in dealing with cyber threats, the role of regulation, standards, and cooperation in tackling cyber threats. And it's intentional that I've sequenced it this way because I want the regulators to come at last to respond to what the private sector and also what IEC is saying, where we will have a sharing of regulatory experiences of WTO members. And this part, we have sort of the bulk of the speakers covering this, ranging from developing and developed countries, sharing about challenges and opportunities for policymakers in this very important area. So after the introductory presentations, I will open the floor for questions from delegates, both in the room and in Zoom. And I look forward to members' active engagement throughout today's session. And in addition, before we plunge into the discussion and presentations, I would just want to highlight some housekeeping rules for the presenters. One, not to exceed 7 minutes per presentation. I will set a timer, and once that rings, I would use the gavel or do something drastic so that I catch your attention. And then after that, you should wrap up within the next minute or so. And so with that, maybe we will go straight into the first part of our presentation, where we will have Mike to talk about the general landscape of cybersecurity issues. So Mike is a technology expert, and his work at IEC focused on the advocacy for benefits of international standards and conformity assessment. And he writes about cybersecurity and transformative technology, including AI. So with that, Mike, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'll try to keep my comments very, very brief because I'm hoping for lots and lots of questions. So please do take notes. I'd say that the most important thing is that the IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, takes an ecosystem approach to cybersecurity. That means that we develop horizontal standards that broadly address both information security and operational security. And that's really important because both have a profound impact on trade. And we also develop vertical applications really targeting specific sectors in the economy. We develop standards, cybersecurity standards that address IoT, vehicles, banking, e-commerce, and everything else that you heard at the beginning of this session. And in terms of benefits, I think there are three that standards and indeed conformity assessment bring. In terms of confidence and trust, compliance with international consensus-based standards builds confidence and trust among trading partners. It brings benefits in terms of harmonization and consistency, and also in terms of market access and global recognitions. Adherence to international standards helps to meet regulatory requirements. I'll say a few more words about that later with a specific example. Now, in terms of going back to that ecosystem approach, I'd like to start by looking at the two horizontal standards really that address the broad cybersecurity needs. And I seem to have jammed. I can't seem to. Okay, and the first of those is ISO IEC 27001, which we develop together with our sister organization ISO. And the whole point of 27001 is to show users how to create an information security management system to protect data, to protect information. It really protects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, which has, of course, profound repercussions for e-commerce and all other kinds of trade. Let's hope it works this time, yes. And the other standard I wanted to mention is 62443, and this is for industrial automation and control systems, but that encompasses energy networks, transport networks, and manufacturing. It really involves the whole manufacturing supply chain. And where the emphasis of information technology, cybersecurity, is on protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability, there's also the safety aspect of IACS systems. Everything needs to be functioning correctly. And I suppose the big difference with information security is that if you have a website, for example, that's under attack, the easiest thing to do is just to switch the system off and go offline. You don't have the luxury of doing that with operational technology, with cyber physical systems, because that operational technology may be critical in terms of ensuring the safety of people or the environment. For example, you might have an operational system that's controlling a chemicals tank, and one of the functions that may have is hitting activating the overflow valve to avoid spillage of dangerous chemicals. So it's not the same as managing information cybersecurity. And I mentioned at the beginning that we have sector-specific vertical standards, and here are a few examples, but there are literally dozens of these. 635154 is for communication systems in maritime navigation. 291281, another one that we developed together with ISO, is about protecting e-commerce transaction, and that's mainly through cryptology. 27036 manages third-party relationships, and again, fundamental for the supply chain. And 27102 even provides guidance on cyber security. One standard that I could have added to that list and is relevant today is 27701. And what ISO IEC 27701 does is it helps you to achieve compliance with regulation, and specifically with the GDPR. One of the annexes maps the controls advocated in 27001 against the requirements of GDPR. So again, very useful in terms of ensuring that your cybersecurity implementation meets the international or regulatory or national regulatory needs of your audience. I wanted to mention also that both 27001 and 62443 embrace a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, with the emphasis very much on business continuity. And that means that we encourage, or the standards encourage users to really understand their assets in terms of business continuity and to prioritize them. These security levels are based on 62443, for example, and security level 0 is where no special requirement or protection is required. And the idea is that you'd allocate some of your assets to levels 0 through 4. And security level 4 is where you're really going to be focusing your resources in terms of cybersecurity, also because it's not feasible to protect everything with the same degree of certainty. And something that we're very proud of is the fact that we also develop conformity assessment. This is testing and certification for cybersecurity. And what this really does is it increases the confidence, it boosts the assurance that standards have been implemented correctly, and that can have a very beneficial impact in terms of attracting trade and maintaining relations with trade partners. It has 3 roles: verification of compliance. Conformity assessment verifies organizations meet the needs outlined in the various cybersecurity standards. It provides assurance that products, systems, or services have undergone rigorous evaluation and adhere to recognized criteria. In terms of risk mitigation, it's identifying mitigating cybersecurity risks, enhancing stability and reliability of trade operations, and it facilitates trade by demonstrating compliance, again, with cybersecurity standards. And I wanted to say a few words about collaboration and cooperation in global trade. So our cybersecurity standards, ISO, IEC, and IEC cybersecurity standards, provide a common framework that fosters harmonization and collaboration. Adopting these standards establishes a level playing field, ensuring that cybersecurity measures are implemented consistently across borders. I'd like to emphasize, and I'm hoping I have questions about this, that our cybersecurity standards are based on consensus. Our members are nations rather than individual organizations, and we attract a very broad range of stakeholder. We really are stakeholder led, and I believe that this collaboration and cooperation really increases the trust and confidence around the standards that we produce. And thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Let's now turn to the second segment of the session to really hear from the private sector and the industry association. So first, we have Ms. Nandini, who is the founder and president and CEO of CryptoMail Cybersecurity Solutions, a Canadian company providing innovative technology to address today's cyber threats. And prior to founding her own company, Nandini served as Senior VP in Bank of America and took on positions in Deloitte. And she was also named one of Canada's 100 most powerful women for her work in the area of technology. With that, I'll hand over the floor to you, Nandini.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. Excellent. Mike, I really like the use of two words, harmonization and collaboration. It just fills the world with so much more positivity, because when it comes to cybersecurity, we're all running amok on every direction. But when you hear words like the ones you put together, very positive, very encouraging, there's hope at light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you for that. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here amongst all of you smart people. I represent the group that focuses on innovation to try to solve the problems that we're facing in the cyber world. I'm just quickly going to see if I can turn this. Okay, here we go. Okay, so and so I speak from the voice of industry, as we like to call ourselves the first responders. When an attack happens, we want to know how, what, where, and understand the problem. So we get right into it. And you know, my perspective is through the lens of industry, through the experience of innovating and trying to take the fight to the attackers, as opposed to being reactive all the time. And so this opinion is purely from that perspective. And we recognize, firstly, from a problem perspective, as all you good folks work towards it, what we're seeing with the pandemic and the geopolitical environment we're facing is that there is a very dire need to move from network security to data-centric security. And I think most of you here, in whichever capacity, will agree to that, in that data is everywhere, folks are working from home and in a hybrid environment. And so, you know, I just want to highlight two words that are very buzzy, but at the same time very relevant. And from our perspective, zero trust being one, we look at it as a borderless security strategy that recognizes that risk can be both inside and outside a network. Again, it's very important to understand the anatomy of the condition we're trying to adhere and deal with, and hence I'm going down this path. So segmenting the network, restricting user access, not allowing intruders to move freely when they're dealing with sensitive data are all critical when it comes to adhering to a borderless security strategy that enables zero trust. And what we find in the course of our innovation, that you have to go hand in glove when it comes to zero trust with data-centric security, especially because the DCS approach eliminates key security gaps when it comes to protecting data wherever it is shared or stored, making sure that enforcement of security and privacy policies is automated, eliminating the potential abuse of power and privilege. And, you know, as our life has changed so dramatically, supporting the security of remote workforce and addressing inside and external threats. And so a quick briefing on, you know, who we are at a high level. We spent the last decade, over a decade, in focusing on understanding the anatomy of cyber threats and addressing it, as I like to call my team, first responders. And so we're proudly Canadian. We worked a lot in this space. We've got some accolades that recognize the work we're doing from our RegTech environment here in Canada as well. And we've also written Canada's first, or provided the seed document for Canada's first data protection standard, which I'll touch on shortly. What we do from a day-to-day perspective, our daily bread is address the threats we see today, from external hacks to internal leaks, ransomware attacks, addressing the supply chain vulnerabilities, and of course, the traditional lost stolen devices, misdirected emails, and also lingering data of consultant partners who may have access to sensitive information. So in the next couple of slides, and I won't hone in too much, it's just a little bit about our ongoing work in cyber, a platform called Circles of Trust that ensures zero trust. But what that software suite does is it allows enterprises, government, military to have complete control over access to data and how we use it. So it addresses, excuse me, the elements of protection by using encryption, whereby data at rest, in transit, and in use is protected. The default state is data is always encrypted. And this is important only because it takes away the reactive element of addressing cyber attacks and really proactively make sure the data always stays protected. Access is dynamic on a need-to-know basis. And that's where we eliminate majority of the threats today by protecting data all the time and only allowing authorized users, whether it's user to system or system to system, to have access. And of course, we use encryption, cryptography, and all the important things with ciphers that are, the latest and greatest. And we also have built-in visibility for logs, who's going in and out, who's accessing what data, whether it's a system to system or a user to system. And then the control, you share data with partner nations, you want to take control back, you can revoke access. So that's a little bit about our technology at a high level. Coming back to our work, we're addressing a lot of that within Canada and assisting with COVID resumption environment. As I mentioned, we provided the seed document for Canada's first data-centric security. Of course, the work by no means is done. The next piece we're focusing on in supporting our country is on interoperability, and of course, working with the military and the government and enterprises worldwide. We're also very proud to share that in the last 3 years since the pandemic, it's hard to believe it's 3 years, I have been part of the management team with 3 different NATO NIAC-sponsored study groups around data-centric security. I'm currently concluding one on secure collaboration in public cloud. And so that having said, there is no question, as you will all agree, that cyber is a very integral part of our world today. We're experiencing what I like to call the perfect storm because the hybrid world has changed the window of opportunity for our adversaries. Hackers, of course, are taking advantage of technology risks, human risks. Unfortunately, there are growing advanced persistent threat groups as well that are specifically nation state driven. But ultimately, if you look at what and why they do what they do, ultimately, these attacks are really designed to invoke fear and gain access to systems. As you were describing, Mike, earlier, in some cases, you can't just turn off a system because it's operationally impossible. And then what do you do? So when I started to think about this session and all of the threats that we address, it was, it was really hard for me to encompass it in one slide, but I put this out there deliberately, not to frustrate you, but to just highlight the obvious on how wide the spectrum of attack vector is today, from nation state driven industrial espionage to ransomware, the supply chain attacks, the insider threats, I mean, the cloud threats, the AI, machine learning components that we talk about, the military attacks we've experienced. All of this brings home the fact that today's warfare is really a cyber warfare. And so what do these perpetrators try to do? Some want to interfere with the military, others try to disrupt the civil infrastructure. Mike, you described it very perfectly in the autonomous vehicle aspect as well. That's a big thing. In the infrastructure grid side, it's a big thing. Many want to steal research and disable nations. Of course, there's the ransomware piece, which I find most abhorring because they want to make money out of it. And then others that want to create an ideology. So what does that mean for us as a community? All of you are here from different parts of the sectors. There is such a strong need for collaboration. And from my perspective, I strongly believe that in order to create a cybersecure world so that my child and your children and the legacy we leave behind is more secure than we are living through, it is so imperative for us to globally be integrated. The areas where we as a community can come together, aside from what we do individually, is really understand what the risks are, what are the source, the nature, improve this collaboration, much like this platform. I mean, I'm totally thrilled to be here with such hardworking, focused folks like yourself to improve that information sharing. What am I working on? What are you working on? How can we converge together to make the change we want to see? And then, of course, apply it in the regulatory approaches to achieve, as you yourself mentioned as well, Mike, on the consistency part, the harmonization part. And so we need to be ready for attacks, and we need to keep sharing with each other areas that, are important for us, that we've learned, lessons learned. From standards perspective, from our perspective, we've dabbled in the DCS standard for Canada, but we totally focus on the importance of it. A very strategic and collaborative orientation is really key. I also want to pause for a second and highlight a few critical things that may be obvious but important to bring forth. Firstly, we as a community, global community, we need to recognize that there are smaller innovative companies that are constantly making inroads in eliminating these cyber threats. Companies like ours are focused not for making a big bag of money, but truly bringing contribution through the knowledge that we have on cryptography, encryption. And today's technologies really need today's today's technologies need to address today's cyber threats. So we must be mindful that technology is really moving fast, and we want to know about what the new information protection protocols are out there available. We also want to be aware that these emerging technologies, and of course I'm self-serving here as well, but I want to highlight that we are enabling.
And Dini, I just want to flag that you have busted your time limit, and maybe if you can end it within the next 1 minute, it'll be good. Thanks.
Yeah. And so establishing the standards like what we wrote at DCS is also work that's going on. So to Wei's final point, I'm in the last 30 seconds, collaboration for us is key. Government, industry, partners, customers, nations, we all work together. As my mother said, it takes a village to bring up a child. It takes the whole community to come together collectively to address these cyber threats. So if there is one call today that I want to leave with, let's talk to each other more, let's share our knowledge, and let's make the world safer one day at a time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nandini. I think so far from the first two presentations, we have heard the importance of the principles of transparency and also interoperability in setting some of the cybersecurity standards and regulations. So next we'll have Jonathan McHale, who is VP at the Computer Communications Industry Associations. Jonathan used to be Deputy AUSTR for ICT Services and Digital Trade and has numerous years of experience in the negotiations of e-commerce chapters in FTAs, including TPP, USMCA, etc. So Jonathan, please.
And how do I put it up? Okay, yes. Thank you very much. Very grateful for the opportunity to address these issues in a very friendly place. I remember very fondly from former life. I have three key points I would like to make. One, I think there is a broad consensus that folks recognize the problem. I think there's a robust and established set of international standards designed to address those issues. On the other hand, there are also deviations from international standards and other measures that are actually undermining the ability to address some of the very threats for which there is this consensus that ought to be addressed. So moving forward, if I can get my clicker to work. Okay. So first, nature of the threat. We've already heard some of these issues. You'll hear a lot in the cyber world of three letters, CIA, not what you think. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's remarkable that there is such consensus around this being the goal, that standards and, if necessary, regulations are intended to address. Lots of examples of how these affect both privacy, commercial interests, and national security. Some of the famous ones, just so people remembered, the Sony, it was hacked, 100 terabytes of data. In the US government's personnel system was hacked. So any US government officials here have been hacked. Your data has been accessed if you were in the US government in 2015, as was I. credit reporting companies, hundreds of millions of records, or 150 million. Just last year, a pipeline in the US was subject to a ransomware attack. And personally, I couldn't get gas one day. It really was very disruptive. So lots of examples of how this is hurting the economy. Estimates of the cost are pretty staggering, and notice how they've gone up most recently. I'm not sure if you can read the numbers, but we're talking in the trillions of dollars there going to 2028. That's a projection. But there's no question that the effect on the economy is potentially enormous. The good news is there has been a very robust effort to try and develop mechanisms to address some of the key threats. We heard directly from the ISO on the 27001 family of standards. That is what one hears a lot about. And certainly if governments are looking to ensure their companies are introducing the best approaches, that's certainly one place to start. I added ISO 22301, maybe not considered directly on point. It's a business continuity standard. So one can imagine a cyber threat really shutting down a company. And so I thought that was the type of standard that was also relevant. So lots of standards may not be specifically cybersecurity named, but they certainly are relevant in this space. Then there's other initiatives. In the US, we developed the cybersecurity framework. A lot of ISO, IEC 27, the 27,000 family, there's lots of overlap there. This was designed for the government. The government wanted to make sure its data was safe. And this was a framework which achieves that. And lots of companies both tried to be consistent with both it and the ISO standard. The other thing worth thinking about, there's very many task-specific standards. They're not named cybersecurity, but whether it's Wi-Fi standards, whether it's the SSL, so when you go to an e-commerce site, and hopefully it has that S in it, which is a guarantee that it's a secure transaction. That is an IETF standard, really important for basically securing data. And then there's lots of ad hoc initiatives developed by companies. The one I would point to is the Coalition to Reduce Cybersecurity Risk, crx2.org, which is a bunch of companies coming together and trying to be carrying the message on how best to carry through these principles, since everybody is affected. It's not good enough if one person in the ecosystem is a good actor. If another is not, then everybody suffers, which is the ecosystem approach that the IEC mentioned earlier. So standardization, I think this is not any news to you. What are the benefits of it? I think what is different here is the nature of the internet. It is by design global. By design, you can download a program that is of global character, and you can update it globally. So on the one hand, it's got this enormous character of being scalable globally, but also updatably globally, which is its advantage, but it's also a risk. Since if there's a problem in one part of the network, you could certainly see it often going into others. And I think the most important point is on the last point, that if you do have a standard and consensus around the world on what to focus on, it's a better way to devote your resources and not get distracted from not putting resources where they're most effective, because we know the bad actors are everywhere, and being distracted by other approaches may actually undermine it. Which is sort of what I want to finish with. There are often many national standards developed in good faith to try and address a real perceived problem, but that fragment the ability to offer global solutions. So in the Wi-Fi world, there was a country that didn't think the existing Wi-Fi standards were safe enough, developed their own. And so you had to have a whole separate line to deal with Wi-Fi security in that particular country. There is an international standard, IEEE 802.1, which was got a whole cybersecurity piece to it, which eventually, I think, supplanted what that country was doing. Lots of countries have national encryption requirements. Not lots, several. Yeah, many often they are standardized, so you will often have an international standard that is different from the most prevalent international standard. Raises the question of what happens when you have dueling international standards. I think in this case, it clearly is a trade impediment, because companies have to integrate two different encryption requirements into a product, which can make it more expensive and sometimes less safe. The next one is a restriction on multi-tenant cloud. For those that don't know what that means, it's having different suppliers be able to access the same data center resources. Technically, what it means is you have physical separation rather than logical separation of customers. That is certainly a restriction on trade, and it's often done in the name of cybersecurity, but in many cases it does not achieve that goal in many people's opinion. And then there's legal overlays to standardization. So there are lots of countries that impose data localization requirements. There are some countries that have started to impose foreign equity sovereignty requirements relating to data or cloud computing, both of which are, you can debate whether that's a TBT relevant type of measure. I would say in a sense it is. You are asking the data center to design into its system a mechanism that keeps the data local. The key takeaway on this, however, is that these particular measures often undermine cybersecurity profoundly. And why is that? It's because a lot of the cybersecurity companies, and maybe the expert can verify this, need global visibility into where data is going, where attacks are coming from, what the nature of the malware is. And localization often undermines that very important goal, and therefore undermines the goal of cybersecurity generally. The other point, I think, is that a lot of these companies are putting in literally billions of dollars into being best of class cybersecurity protections. If you have a data center that is got those protections in one particular region, and another country says, sorry, you aren't allowed to operate in my country, then you are denying yourself the best of class protections often. So the questions for the TBT, again, this is obvious for all of you. I probably shouldn't need to even have this. Is the question, is the standard mandatory? Interesting question, since a lot of the deviations from international standards start as voluntary, but certainly can creep in to become mandatory, either through government procurement, for example. A government procurement entity will mandate what is otherwise a voluntary standard to be included. Other things are, for example, you can't get insurance if you don't have a particular standard. And if you can't get insurance, you really can't operate in many countries. So it becomes de facto mandatory. Are all stakeholders able to participate in the development? In a lot of countries, no. Often the experts are restricted to companies or nationals of that particular location. And that impedes, of course, getting the best knowledge and having, broad representative views in the development of the standards. Is there adequate time to solicit, integrate stakeholder input? These are very complicated issues, and the beauty of voluntary standards making is it does allow the best minds to come together. If you haven't provided enough time to integrate and put forward your proposal, you're not going to do the process any good. Recently, there was a case where a measure came out and there was a request for comments, but by the time the deadline was reached, there was already a new version of the standard being put forward, which means that the government was obviously not taking the input into account. Do the requirements have the effect of restricting trade? I think in most cases, companies can comply and can manage to do their business, even if the deviations are are minor. If they're big, and if you're an SME, often it becomes an insuperable barrier, and you will abandon the market. Is there an international standard that could address the goal in a least trade restrictive manner? So here, I think what we have tried to do, for example, in the US, certainly when I was in government, and our certainly supports this going forward, is to create a presumption that when a government does develop cyber-related measures, that they would first look to an international standard as a basis for any requirement they're setting, and that would fall within the safe harbor that the TBT creates for that being presumptively reasonable. Finally, I'd like to leave with a different issue, but which is that there are many new measures one sees, again, that they're not cast as cybersecurity measures, but they do have the effect of undermining cybersecurity. I already mentioned data localization policies, but you will look, for example, in the EU now, there's a big regulation being implemented called the Digital Markets Act. Part of it has very prescriptive technical requirements with respect to a subclass of participants in the market, the so-called gatekeepers. These companies have interoperability obligations. They have access to specific functionality of devices obligations. They have certain data sharing obligations. So again, these are not are not motivated by cybersecurity, they're motivated by other reasons, but it is worth thinking whether these types of measures should be notified to the TBT, because they do impose a technical obligation on the recipient company, and they have to design their products and services to meet these types of regulations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think we'll revisit some of these questions later after the private sector presentation. So next we'll have Jackie, who is the CEO of Vistrat Solutions, who specializes in training on cyber investigations and law-related topics, forensic investigations, etc. I won't go into an introduction in the interest of time. So Jackie, maybe you can take the floor to do your presentation. And after this round, we'll do a round of Q&A before we move into the government presentations. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh, fantastic. I'll then proceed to share my screen. So my topic today is one that basically spans the two disciplines, and I'm so glad to have heard the previous speakers, because across the world we speak the same language. We talk about the importance of the CIA triad, we talk about the importance of harmonization, and we talk about the importance of working across borders in a way to ensure our cybersecurity. But I want to add a dimension today that's not always spoken of, because it's a sensitive topic. So we have our lawmakers, and then of course we have our lawbreakers. If we look at the world of cybersecurity, we tend to group everything into a cyber incident. But if we look at that cyber incident and we look at the fact that in most instances it might be attributed to the malicious actions of a person, the end result of that is actually that it becomes a crime scene. And then, unfortunately, the laws of cybersecurity do not apply first and foremost, but that of the investigation of a crime scene. So I am in a fortunate position that on behalf of some international agencies, I have been presenting training to a number of law enforcement agencies, working with them on their strategies, but also on the other side that I'm busy drafting cybersecurity legislation for South Africa. So the perspective is one talking from personal experience, but also to say that you cannot split these two disciplines. And if we look at the world of cybersecurity and we look at cybercrime, I always describe it as two parts of the same coin. And that coupled together with data privacy becomes the most important coin that we have in that purse of e-commerce. We have cybersecurity not only relevant to our businesses, be it large or small, to our governments, but also to the individuals. And nowhere has it been more apparent than during the COVID phase and lockdown, when we basically had to bring business into the house of each individual. And eventually, what is it all about? It is all about data. It's data for us, it's data for making our businesses work, for running our governments, for designing new products. But that very same data is the crown jewels also for the criminals. And that touches on everything that we do in terms of cybersecurity, how we process it, how we protect it, how we use our data, how we use it to interpret things, and how we use it, for example, to predict. Now, if we look at legislation, the hated word of legislation, people think it's complex. Yes, sometimes it is. But do we need to know the basics of legislation? Yes, we unfortunately do, because with legislation comes that element also of compliance. I also say that all is not lost if we say that we need to know a little bit about our regulations and about our legislations that will apply to the specific field of cybersecurity, because we do have Ghostbusters. Who are we going to call? In this case, we call on the experts. And the previous speakers have also highlighted the importance of joining hands and talking to each other across borders, across disciplines, within our own organizations, and sharing our knowledge, because specifically when it comes to cybercrime and then of course our cybersecurity and cybercrime information, the only people that benefit when we do not share this information is the people breaking the rules. The need for international cooperation, for legal instruments that help us to facilitate that process is key. The harmonization of our laws remain key. If you can imagine that your company suffers a major cybersecurity breach, and it is established that a group of criminals from another country actually launched an attack, and it's an ongoing attack, how important does it become that your particular country's law enforcement and that other countries' law enforcement are able to talk to each other and to exchange digital evidence that has been gathered in a way that is admissible in both countries' courts? How important is it that you are able to put your CERT, your cyber incident response teams in your country into contact with that country where the criminals are or where the attack came from, in order to be able to address and to remediate this? Because what happens if we don't, ladies and gentlemen, take the profit out of crime? It will continue. So with our cybersecurity, as I said, we need to also pay attention to our lawbreakers. The need for cyber-related legislation, and under legislation, I also include regulations, I also include treaties. It underpins our e-commerce. It stresses to say that my country has a good posture. We regard cybersecurity as a priority. It makes, and I always say, it gives you a warm and fuzzy feeling to do business with that country. It lowers the risk of doing business. Going back to what the previous speaker had said about a risk-based approach, you will more readily do business with a country that you know has good cybersecurity measures in place, that has data privacy at the front of their minds, and if something does go wrong, does have the mechanisms to effectively address cybercrime. We have also now, with critical infrastructure, moved towards identifying critical information infrastructure, naming institutions like banks, telcos. When they go down, what happens? Luckily, I don't think the rest of the world are in the same position as South Africa that suffer from something called load shedding. So we are without electricity for most of the time. But how does that affect our cybersecurity? How do we plan for those eventualities? And how do we see that those do not leave gaps that other people can exploit? And it's also about increasing training and awareness. when we train people, not only companies, but also individuals, and make them aware of the need for cybersecurity, but also how to protect themselves and how to detect incidents, it makes our lives much easier. And coming from this track, this is something that we've done. We've devoted most of our time to training and awareness, and of course now writing legislation, because we found that if we equip people, it is as good as putting a driver in a Ferrari. As good as that Ferrari can be, if the driver doesn't know how to drive the car is not an effective tool. So in summary, again, harmonization, international cooperation, and of course, standardization. Because in the world of cyberspace, and this is the world where we live in today, trade, an effective and efficient and prosperous trade equals trust. If we do not have trust, it increases our risk profile, it increases the ability or the measures and the money that we have to invest to make sure that we have safe systems. It makes us ask whether to do business with a country or with another organization that does not have cybersecurity at the forefront. Is it worth the investment and the risk that I'm going to put my business through? Sovereignty and local legislation. Yes, we have a lot of international things, and we say that the country still remains sovereign. But as one of the previous speakers has said, sometimes it's not a question of sovereignty. If you want to take part in effective communication, you at least have to have some kind of minimum standards and legislation in place to tick the box to say that you are a cyber secure environment. Incident response, very important, that ability to identify and to react to an incident, to use data to become more proactive in our efforts to curb cybersecurity incidents. And that incident response is not only a local, but an industry as well as an international mechanism. And here again, thinking about the lawbreakers and what law enforcement has in place, think about the 24/7 centers that people have around the world that can talk to each other to react to a crime that happens within seconds. Mutual legal assistance and information sharing. It's not just about evidence, ladies and gentlemen, it's also about sharing data and sharing intelligence. I want to stress again that if we do not share, the only people that will benefit are the ones that are intent on overcoming our security measures and eventually, if it is intentional, benefiting from those actions. How do we address a borderless crime? Coming from Canada, the borderless approach to security is an extremely important one. We cannot be honed in on the borders of our countries. We cannot be bordered or honed in on the borders of our specific business. That's not how those attacks operate. They will come from far and wide, and they can come from different locations all at once. Here we are in South Africa with a recent attack on our Department of Justice. It became the Department of Just Us because our courts could not even operate for 3 weeks. So, learning from those lessons, cybersecurity, yes, definitely at the forefront, but that resilience that we build into our organizations must be coupled with two things: the ability to gather digitally sound evidence that's admissible in a court of law or that we can use in our incident reporting, and then are we taking the profit out of cybercrime? Because at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, not only are data breaches closing businesses, not only is the reputational harm attached to cybersecurity incidents phenomenal, but cybercrime is paying, and it is paying well. Why? Because it happens so fast, and sometimes, and in most instances, what are we doing? We're not catching the criminals, we are playing catch up. I thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you, Jackie. I think that was very short and concise, and I just want to sort of also bring members' attention to one of the articles that was published in The Guardian today in terms of sizing the cost of cybercrime, that we are looking at about 600 billion to 6 trillion. That's the range that we're looking at. And if we are using the upper bound, then that would be about 10% of global GDP, which is very significant. And how do we sort of use that to put things into perspective for international cooperation on cybersecurity? And I think given that we have about 7 presentations later by sort of members, maybe we'll stop now to take a first round of Q&A for the private sector folks. And given that I'm the moderator, I'll start. I think the advice, or rather the message that private sector stakeholders are sending across the regulators are very clear. But just in case it's not clear enough, I would like every one of them to share one-word advice to the regulators in terms of what they should be mindful of when it comes to cybersecurity regulations, forming regulations and also standards. So with that, then maybe I'll start with Mike, just one word.
Interoperability.
Okay. And next, Nandini.
Collaboration.
Okay. Jonathan.
Global visibility. Sorry, 2.
And last, Jackie.
Adaptability.
Thank you. All right, with that, I'll open the floor to members to raise any questions to the private sector. I hope you hear the sort of the keywords loud and clear, and you can factor that into some of your comments as well, if any. And if I can remind members, when you're raising question, please be very to the point and specific. You should ask your question within the first minute. If not, I'll cut you off. You're free to use the Zoom platform to ask questions as well. It's a bit surprising that there are no questions. The EU, please.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the presentation. I would have many questions, but I will make only one because I abide by the rules. And I'll try to be short. Do you think that the legislation in the country of origin of the producer, the supplier, does it play any role in cybersecurity, in whether cybersecurity is strong enough or not? And actually, it's a question for everyone.
Thanks, Aitor. Next, we have China.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question on how the regulators view the different level of standards from regional, national, and international cybersecurity standards, and how do they complement each other? Thank you.
Thanks. Just to clarify, your question is directed to the regulators, so that will be the next section, right? And
I'm sorry.
folks. All right. Any more question? If not, we'll move on to the EU. We'll get the speakers to come in right after. I don't see any flags raised. So if so, maybe Mike, maybe you could take a step at answering the EU's question in terms of whether the country of origin would sort of factor into this process of standard formulation.
I think the simple answer is it depends on whether that country's regulations are based on international standards. For example, with the EU, we have an agreement whereby something like 80% of IEC international standards automatically are adopted as EU standards and used as the basis of regulation. So the simple answer is it depends on how they formulate their regulation.
Maybe we'll quickly move online to Nandini. How about you as a practitioner, as an industry, as a business owner? How do you look at this issue?
Sorry, wait, can you repeat it? I'm having connectivity problems. Sorry about that.
No worries. Maybe as a owner of a cybersecurity firm, how do you look at this problem of country of origin? How does that factor into your business sort of decision-making process? And from the industry perspective, are there ways to sort of like govern this? And is there a need for the governments to come in to make country of origin sort of a factor? What do you think about it?
Personally, I think that when it comes to the cyber playing field, it's very neutral in that we're all working towards the same goal. And so limiting it or creating, barriers of national protocols will do us an injustice in addressing this crisis. And it is a crisis. There's no ifs or buts about it. So that's why my chosen word for the year is collaboration, because it's about, what has Canada done? As I mentioned in my presentation, we've got a data-centric standard that we've released late last year. By no means is it the be-all or end-all, but it will certainly be useful in our global discussions to augment further what other nations have done to combine that effort and make it universal. So long-winded answer to a question that you posed is, there is an urgent need to continue this kind of collaborative discussions, to continue joining in the joint efforts to be able to have both regulators, industry, nations work together to a common, safer environment. So that's, really why, personally, from an innovation standpoint, I continue to circle the globe in addressing the work that we're doing. Not so much about, look at me, I'm Sandra D, but really about, here's where we are with this battle. What can we do to do further that and combine that effort with others as well? So that's my take. Over.
Thanks, Nandini. And next we'll have Jackie, followed by Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I agree with my previous speakers in that it should be evaluated on a case-to-case basis, but sometimes it is not as simple as just looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective. By way of example, in our South African law, there is clauses that deal with data privacy and data protection that prescribes minimum security standards that you have to adhere to in the processing of information. So if you're dealing, for example, with a product that the core goal of it is to process information in any way, you might find yourself having to adhere to a data privacy standard that you thought, why should I look at that within cybersecurity? For me, also, the important thing, and this is something that we take into account when drafting legislation as well, this is a global world, and you should also look at it from a market perspective. Are you intending on just selling it in one market or marketing something that can be used across the globe? So definitely, I think the consideration, and we're moving towards that consideration, that we need to create a playing field when everybody is at least assured of a minimum set of standards that things will adhere to. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you. I think so the question is whether the country of origins legislation, how important it was to addressing cybersecurity issues. I think it can cut both ways. You can have domestic legislation that's unhelpful. I was trying to make that point with respect to data localization, which affirmatively makes it more difficult to have global visibility into data threats. And so that would be unhelpful legislation. On the other hand, you could see a country where cyber criminals are allowed to go free and we know who they are, and yet they can't be brought to justice. And that would clearly be unhelpful. It would be obviously would be good if they did have laws that would prevent that. I think what's interesting is different countries approach these whole problems in very different ways. We don't typically have prescriptive legal obligations on companies with respect to cybersecurity, except in for government procurement, where there's a FedRAMP. We have a whole set of regulations for that. Doesn't mean the companies don't have all these tools that they use. It doesn't mean there aren't legal consequences for not keeping the data safe. There's other laws that are used to go after a company that's not protecting data adequately, deceptive practices, for example. And then, of course, we have at the state level in the US, for example, lots of very different laws on data breach. And there, I think you have the issue of lack of harmonization, which in the US is a problem on our side, right? You've got different requirements in different states, and it's difficult for companies to be able to know how to comply. And my earlier point was you devote resources away from tackling the problem and spend them on compliance rather than actually trying to solve the problem. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I think broadly what I'm hearing from the private sector is that there's a need sort of to have interoperable standards, and they need to be made on technical and objective merits and in a transparent manner. And I think it's important that sort of members come together to have this conversation in terms of how do we foster that kind of environment to build a collective sort of policy formulation process. And I think with that, then I'll segue into the next segment. Sure.
And I say very quickly that the IEC is a not-for-profit multi-stakeholder organization, and I would invite everyone who's spoken today, Nandini and Jackie, to come and work with the IEC. Our door is always open, and the more of us that work together, the stronger our cybersecurity standards can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike, for the timely pitch. And now we'll move on to the next section of our presentation. First, I would like to invite Tian Huirong, Chief Engineer from China Communication Standards Association, to talk about China's standardization activities on cybersecurity and data protection. Ms. Tian, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my desk.
Yep, we can see it. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, this is Huiren Qian from CCSA China. Very happy to have this chance to share some information about, about the standardization activities of cybersecurity and data protection. So, sorry. So for security standard, we mainly have national standard, industry standard, association standard, and enterprise standard. A type of standard has different applied scope. Now, many entities have joined in the standardization activities. For example, CCS's members include telecom operators, manufacturers, internet enterprises, research institute, planning and design institutes, and so on. So for national security standards, related work is organized by TC 260, the National Information Security Standardization Technical Committee. This TC was established in 2002 and is responsible for standards about security technology, security mechanisms, security service, security management, and security assessment. CCIC we mentioned before is an industry standards development organization in ICT area, named the China Communication Standardization Association. CCIC has TC8, Network and Data Security Technical Committee, which is the major security TC of CCIC. There are also other TCs such as industry Internet of Things. These TCs also have security standardization work on the specific areas. CCIC's security standards include fundamental security and industry support, network security, data security, and emerging technology, security of integrated applications, and so on. I will mainly introduce the security work of CCSA for network security standards. They mainly focus on the security architecture, security requirement, security mechanism, security products, security assessments, aim to have common understanding on network risks, network security mechanism, and security practices. And it can have several types, such as overall and basic security, security architecture, security technology, security products, security platform, and also security protection requirements of products, application, or scenarios. We have some work about security evaluation or assessment. So for security evaluation or assessment, we could have an example. We have some work related with security capability evaluation and evaluation work for general products and product for application scenarios. And this related standards mainly focus on the maturity and quality evaluation methods of various security products. As mentioned before, data protection is an important topic. Related standards focus on data lifecycle security protection, including personal information protection and big data security. Related standards have several types, such as fundamental data security techniques, data security management, and data security for specific scenarios, such as mobile internet, IoT, cloud computing, and so on. In recent years, emerging technologies attract attention, such as artificial intelligence, 5G, blockchain, and cloud computing. Especially AI security risk and security governance become very important topics. So for emerging technology security standards, some research about security risks analysis, security requirement, security architecture, security techniques, security solutions are needed. With the quick development of digitalization, ICT technologies are applied in more and more vertical industry area. These integrated application security risks not only impact on network and information system, but also spreading and impact on the real world. The integrated application security standards focus on industry internet security, internet of vehicle security. For industry internet, related standards can be categorized as classification and security protection, security management, and vertical industry security. So for internet of vehicles, related security standards can be categorized as overall and basic security, network communication security, application security, terminal and facilitation security, data security, security support. CCIC also has broad cooperation with international SDOs such as IEEE, IETF, OMA. CCIC also works in the partnership of GSC 3GPP1 M2M at CGK. So we seek mutual promotion and harmonized development between Thematic standards and international standards. Thanks for your attention. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Rong, for your presentation. I'm glad to also see that there's a bit of sort of connection with what the folks before have presented in terms of international collaboration and working on international standards adaptation. I just want to put this out there that, you know, as members present later, bear in mind that China has asked a question just now on how national, regional, and local regulations will come in play and how they complement one another when it comes to the different level of standards. So you might want to feature that in your presentation as well. So next we'll have Mr. Jiefu Gan, who's the Vice Director of the China Cybersecurity Review Technology and Certification Center, to talk about the role of inclusive multilateral cooperation on cybersecurity standards and conformity assessment in the development of the digital economy. Jiefu, go ahead.
Hello. Can you hear me? And can you
Yep.
see my
We can see the slides. Yep, and we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank Chair and thank moderator. Good afternoon and good evening, WTO members and speakers. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to share some ideas and thinking about cybersecurity regulation. First, I will address some challenges and opportunities. Then I will try to make some suggestions. In the end, I will briefly introduce some practices of cybersecurity certification in China. These are some opportunities. Digital economy has become the most active part of the world economic development. Data and digital products have become the essential elements of the world trade. Therefore, cybersecurity and data security issues impact the world economy and trade in an unprecedented and profound way, which give us the chance to do best or do worst. These are some challenges. There are some serious problems in cybersecurity and data security issues, such as block of free flow of data in an orderly manner, flaws or backdoors in ICT products and services to illegally obtain users' data, control or manipulate users' system and devices, jeopardizing personal information and privacy through the use of ICTs, illicit stealing, exposure, and trade of personal information and commercial data. The lack of international consensus in digital governance results that there are considerable differences in the cybersecurity regulation among various countries. Because of these differences, the global digital governance deficit is becoming increasingly prominent, and such problems as inadequate rules and inequitable order have become more evident in the digital field. As the UN Secretary General has owned two markets, two sets of standards, and two supply chains are emerging in the cyber and digital domain. Technological monopoly and unilateral coercive measures bring harms to the stability of global supply chain. In general, the risks of division and fragmentation of digital governance rules are growing. There's some suggestions. The development of digital economy relies on the effective protection of security and privacy. So the cybersecurity regulation based on international consensus is important. Meanwhile, it is also important to ensure that markets will be open and free from any discrimination. The competitiveness of companies and their products should be the principal determination of industrial success and international trade. Governments and authorities should, therefore, ensure full intellectual property protection, full transparency.
I'm going to stop you for a while because I think that you're on the wrong slide. You're talking about suggestions, but you have gone back one slide to the challenges.
Okay. Oh, okay. So full transparency of government policies and regulations, and non-discrimination for foreign products in all markets, and removal of unreasonable burdens on world commerce. Therefore, these principles are reasonable. First, unity and cooperation. We should adhere to unity rather than division, cooperation rather than confrontation, inclusiveness rather than exclusion, and formulate globally interoperable common rules and standards on the basis of mutual respect and broad consensus, and prevent the division and fragmentation of digital governance rules. Second, balance between development and security. We should put an equal emphasis on development and security. Forge an open, inclusive, fair just and non-discriminatory environment for digital development and refrain from overstretching and abusing the issue of security to contain and suppress the legitimate economic and technological development of others. Third, fairness and justice. We should promote international cooperation and assistance, stand against technological monopoly and unilateral coercive measures, maintain an open, secure, and stable supply chain of global digital products and services, and make global digital development more equitable and effective and beneficial to all. To achieve these goals, it's an effective way to enhance inclusive multilateral cooperation on cybersecurity standardizations and conformity assessments. Because certification and accreditation is the basic system to strengthen quality management and improve market efficiency under the market economy, and is an important tool and technical support for national governance system. And most important thing is it's international accepted. In the end, I will introduce some practices in China. With the reforms to streamline the government, delegate power, and improve government services in China, certification and accreditation used as a tool of government management is more widely and deeply applied in the field of cybersecurity. By using certification and accreditation, the government management departments are freed from the microtechnology evaluation activities. Direct management is changed into indirect management, and the effectiveness of administration and management in accordance with relevant laws and regulations is promoted. Thus, it stimulates the vitality of cybersecurity-related industries. China is developing a mode of cybersecurity management using the tool of conformity assessment. The mode is as follows. First, relevant laws and regulations determine the goal of supervision. Second, national standards of China specify the details of the legal requirements. Third, the voluntary certification system of cybersecurity promoted by the government ensure the legal requirements are implemented. For example, Article 23 of the cybersecurity law stimulates that critical network devices and specialized cybersecurity products shall be sold or provided only after they have passed the relevant security certification or testing, which proves the requirements from the relevant mandatory national standards have been met. These legal requirements are specified in mandatory national standards of China, GB 42250 and GB 40050. Then 4 ministries, including CAC, MIIT, MPS, and CNCA, jointly issued the public announcement on the issue of the catalog of related devices and products, which includes 4 critical network devices and 11 specialized cybersecurity products. The CNCA, together with other 3 ministries, confirms and publishes the directory of institutions responsible for the security certification and security testing, including 1 certification body and 21 labs. The CNCA and the CAC issued a public announcement to clarify the requirements for the implementation of security certification, which formally indicates the establishment of the security certification system. Same as above, the voluntary certification system for data security management is established to implement the legal requirements of data security law. And the voluntary certification system for personal information protection is established to implement the legal requirements of personal information protection law. By enhancing more inclusive multi-network cooperation on cybersecurity standardizations and conformity assessments, we can increase the openness of digital products, help businesses improve their awareness of data protection, increase self-discipline, and take concrete actions to protect personal information and privacy in cyberspace, bridge digital divide, promote fair and free trade globally, and reduce trade barriers and trade protectionism to create a global digital market. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Yefu, for sharing China's experience in this area. And next, I would like to turn to Ms. Amy Man, International Policy Specialist from the National Institute of Standard and Technology from the US, to present mainly the NIST cybersecurity framework and also the principles underpinning the approach to developing cybersecurity solutions. Amy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to be part of the discussion today and have really enjoyed the remarks from all of the speakers previously and appreciate the chance to share some information on NIST's cybersecurity and privacy resources as well. I'm hoping the screen is sharing. Is everyone able to see the slide?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you. At NIST, we are a non-regulatory agency at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and our mission is to help advance U.S. innovation in our industry by creating measurement science and standards and technology that helps improve our economic security and quality of life. So while we develop these guidelines, particularly around cybersecurity, we have these guidelines that is used by our government, but used voluntarily by our industry. It's very important for us to have that close collaboration with industry as their perspectives help really shape and help us in the development of this guidance and helps to improve its use voluntarily. We've been doing cybersecurity for many years now, since the 70s, and celebrated our 50th year last year. We're continuing to work with partners in a number of areas. The cybersecurity framework, as mentioned, a privacy framework, very similar in structure, Internet of Things, IoT cybersecurity guidance, digital identity, post-quantum cryptography, and a number of different areas. We again very much rely on our partnership with industry as well as our other government agencies. And a lot of our work is used by regulators, and we see that approach and language that shows up in regulation, but currently this is used by our US government and voluntarily adopted by industry. Particularly, we do work closely with our sister agency in the Department of Commerce, the International Trade Administration, who really helps facilitate opportunities for us to engage internationally with our partners, discussing these types of approaches and ways that we can continue reducing barriers to trade. And we also work closely with them on our development of standards, work closely with our State Department colleagues and USTR, and very much appreciate the chance to engage and share some of our language that sometimes does seem to pop up in international standards or things like trade agreements. So that's the type of work we hope to continue doing for years to come. The cybersecurity framework itself was developed after our president asked us in 2013 to develop flexible guidance to manage cybersecurity risk across critical infrastructure sectors. And the framework has since grown and has a broader scope than just critical infrastructure protection. It's been updated once back in 2018, and NIST is currently in the process of updating it again, relying very much on stakeholder feedback to help shape and make it continue to be a useful tool for managing cybersecurity risks. The framework as it stands now consists of 5 different functions that you can see on the screen there: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And it's broken down from there into further categories and subcategories that are actions and controls to help achieve those outcomes. We are still working to update it, and it may look a little bit different with new functions, but as we've worked with stakeholders, we had heard that this is really a common and accessible language for helping to manage cybersecurity risk. And it's also been found to be valuable because it relies very much on international standards and guidance that people are already following and using. We've already heard many of those mentioned today, things like ISO 27001, ISO 62443. Many of those are already referenced and leveraged in the cybersecurity framework. However, we recognize that standards continue to be revised and new ones are developed constantly. So we've been trying to evolve more to what we call an online informative reference program, or OLER. And this will help us to better keep up in real time by having a repository online where people can submit mappings or crosswalks, not just to our cybersecurity framework, but some of our other resources like a privacy framework that has a mapping to Europe's general protection regulation and other things. So that is another area that we hope to grow so people can continue to use and leverage international standards when using resources like the cybersecurity framework. Framework, again, has also been developed not just by the US government, but close collaboration with international industry and government as well. And that's something we're going to continue in this process for updating it as well. We have seen the framework pop up in our own White House National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out in March, referenced along with other work from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, who we work with. So that risk-based, standards-based approach is something that has been found to be of value and helps continue informing policy and strategy that's developed and used in the US today. We've also seen partners throughout the world who have adopted and used this risk-based approach, and we very much have learned from their successes and challenges and how they have used it in regulation or policy. Italy was one of the first to adopt and put it into their national policy, and they've even spoken at some of our workshop updates to tell us how they've used it and help inform us as we continue to make changes to our version. Ireland has used it in some of their requirements for meeting Europe's National Information Security NIS Directive, and we've learned a lot from them. Israel and Uruguay have also used it in national policy, and Japan, who was actually the first to directly translate it. And now we're up to about 9 translations, with hopefully more to come to help improve use of the framework globally. It is available in Spanish, Portuguese, most recently Ukrainian and Indonesian, and we hope to add more to our website that's listed there, where we collect these adaptations and translations that could hopefully be helpful resources for our partners. We also continue working with our international partners in standards development organizations like ISO, IEC. We've contributed to the development of both the technical specification 27110 and the technical reference document 27103 that have some of the language and the approach and categories and functions of the framework, but it is something that's not a US government or NIST document, and we're very excited that it's a resource that's available through ISO, IEC that can help people with developing frameworks to manage cybersecurity risk. We also continue to be very active and even helping with the editing of some guidance being developed to help meet the requirements of the newly revised 27002, which again has some of the language that also appears in the cybersecurity framework. So we're very excited to continue that international alignment and alignment with standards as we update the framework. We had recently put out an updated core. That's the 5 functions I mentioned earlier, plus 1 new one on govern that we'd heard from stakeholders. And we've also been hearing a lot of other things that have become important, especially over the last 5 years with changes in technology and the risk management landscape. So we'll be putting out a new draft later this summer, incorporating a lot of feedback we've heard with better building out supply chain, how to use the framework in different contexts, things we heard earlier like zero trust architecture, hybrid work, and telework. So we've been making some changes based off of what we've heard and very much rely on your feedback and engagement as well. So we've appreciated the help we've had to date, and we'll have that new draft out for comment in another workshop later this fall. Mentioned some of our other resources, but one I wanted to highlight and heard about from some of our other speakers as well in our IoT cybersecurity work. We also put out a lot of guidance that Covering can use and industry has helped contribute to and voluntarily use as well. Things for helping to improve the security of products, even from a manufacturing stage, things that really approach that ecosystem view of securing not just the product, but the environment it's operating in, have guidance around how to better secure networks using MUD and other standards, how to help educate end users who can better use the products and employ good skills like updating the password or using software updates. And a lot of this has also come into play in some of our ISO IEC work as well, contributions for other work that's going on in standards development there. So we're very excited to continue working with government and industry as we develop and put out this guidance and help contribute that to standards as well. So I know this was a lot, but really appreciate the chance to share some of the work we do with government and industry from our non-regulatory role at NIST, but helping to continue support these companies and work in commerce abroad. Thanks again for the chance to be part of this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I've also heard that you have also responded to some of the questions that Jonathan has raised earlier in his presentation when it comes to stakeholder engagement and gathering input from the community. So with that, then next I would like to invite Mr. Tamura Hideyasu, Senior Director for International Trade Policy from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan, to talk about the challenges and opportunities of trade and regulations in the area of cybersecurity. And we are very honored to have you here in person to participate in this.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'd like to make my, where is the, thank you. How should I operate? Going back, going? Don't know.
Wait for the slide to go up.
Just wait for the slides. Thank you very much. Those presentations were quite valuable to me for getting some responses from the relevant agencies and the business community on the cybersecurity issues as they are actually facing now. So I like to touch upon several issues from the rule side. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, and in these 7 years, Japanese government has made 31 public comments to several countries, cybersecurity related measures. And of course, I don't specify the name of those countries, but if I could look into those kind of cybersecurity related measures, there are several patterns of measures taken by those countries. And one of them is a requirement of a security assurance test to equipment service providers in the process of the procurement of those countries, so-called critical infrastructures. And of course, the scope or coverage of those critical infrastructure is quite different between country by country. And in doing so, prohibition or strong recommendation of utilization of the specific components and parts are sometimes incorporated. And for the prohibition is like, okay, like this country's products are a bit too risky for introducing in my country's critical infrastructure. So not to use that, or more to recommend domestically produced components or parts or software to the critical infrastructure. Those kind of measures are taken. And it could be a kind of disguised protectionism, in my view, like could lead to, because it could lead to enhanced domestic production or adoption of domestically developed technologies as a result. And also, several presenters already mentioned, those measures would be quite closely associated with the restriction of cross-border data transfer or data flow, like requiring the data storage within its own jurisdiction. So if those measures are taken in a kind of excessively stringent manner in light of achieving the legitimate public policy objectives, it could be a kind of trade or business impediments or barriers. That's a huge concern from Japanese companies. And another concern is I cannot move this slide. Okay. I can do it. Yeah. Okay. And as I mentioned, those kind of cybersecurity measures are a bit cross-cutting in light of the trade agreements. And actually, Japan has raised those kind of concerns in this TBT committee, as well as Services Council. And we are now trying to raise some of those concerns in the plurilateral trade agreements implementation bodies, especially including those in CPTPP and AOSEP. And there is some commonality, of course, measures related to the technical barriers and data free flow, there are some commonality, like so not to be the unnecessary obstacles to international trade or arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination, and be necessary to fulfill the legitimate objectives or necessary to achieve legitimate public policy objectives. So all countries should comply those kind of rules. That could be the health way to create healthy environment where cybersecurity protection and legitimate trade coexist. Okay, yeah, and in the several plurilateral trade agreements, there are several WTO plus kind of disciplines, and one example is in the CPTPP, and there is specific annex on the information and communication technology products, and those kind of, like say, like described here, some of the algorithms, those kind of design details, those kind of measures are adopted here. So I hope those kind of high standard agreements could be more popular in the global trade community. Of course, I don't think it's an easy way to review or amend the TBT agreement itself, but this kind of high standard trade agreements could be one way to pursue. And in addition to that, I stop briefly. And another aspect is a kind of more voluntary kind of measures or mechanism. And in that regard, what we are discussing internally inside the Japanese government is if we could make a kind of interoperability or mutual recognition on the cybersecurity labeling. It could be one way to further facilitate trade amongst the trusted countries. And now recently, US, Singapore, EU, and also Japan are taking cybersecurity certification system. And if we could make some insurance for interoperability across those labeling schemes, it would create more business-friendly and cybersecurity is protected, those kind of business environment. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry that I was not so good in this kind of slide operation.
No problem, Tamara. I think it's because it's a PDF, it's harder to. I don't think that.
Yeah, sorry. I should have sent it in PowerPoint format. Sorry.
No problem. But I think that's very useful. Especially when you talked about, this, I mean, at this very last slide, I think the problem of a spaghetti ball situation that was also flagged by the private sector stakeholders earlier in terms of how can we sort of achieve harmonization of standards to prevent fragmentation. And I think suggestions were made earlier, including adopting international standards. So next, I think we'll move on to the next speaker. We'll have Mr. Muhammad Andi Aziz, Senior Cybersecurity Specialist from the National Cyber and Encryption Agency from Indonesia, to make his presentation on a case study on Indonesia on leveraging regional partnerships to improve cybersecurity and digital trade. And I think we'll hear him echoing what Tamura-san mentioned just now about RCEP, as well as how can we use the global trade architecture to harmonize cybersecurity cooperation and standards.
Yes, thank you for having me for this session. Very glad to share our thoughts and experience. I would like to share a bit about our cybersecurity cooperation in the Southeast Asia regions, especially on its connection to foster the digital economy and also trade in the region. So the digital economy has been a top priority for the Indonesian government in recent years. So the digital economy has been a big potential for our country's growth. And technology also has made many businesses easily accessible for industry and also industry to reach new markets and also lots of citizens and also community. So the digital economy is considered one of our paths to a more inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. our digital landscape mainly concentrated in e-commerce and also the digital financial service. It has been expanded rapidly in recent years, and also the adoption of digital financial payments also has accelerated further during the pandemic with 30% year-on-year increase. And also the digitalization is also advancing the traditional financial sector and will likely to accelerate further with the COVID-19. So we also project that the digital economy would contribute at least 14% of Indonesia's GDP by the 2027, which is a very significant increase than the last few years. And ultimately, the digital economy will help Indonesia to achieve a high income country by the next few years. So when we look at the cyber risk exposure in Indonesia in recent years, the cyber risk exposure we face today is very challenging. It's very enormous in terms of the cyber attack volume, the number of cyber attack, and also the internet traffic anomalies increased very significantly in the last 4 years. We saw at least 7 times increase in terms of attack volumes in the last 4 years. And based on the Microsoft research, there are about 22% of the computer in Indonesia were infected by malware. And we also saw that about thousands of websites that have been defaced in our country in just 1 year. And we also received about more than 2,000 cyber reports related to cyber incidents and also vulnerabilities. And attention to cyber risk has increased over the past decade. And even the trend comes near to operational risk, as we see in the diagram here. Just over half of Indonesian business reported experiencing a cyber incident, and also the data loss in our country, also the primary concern in many business. And about 70% of Indonesia business and organization they have concern about reputational damage because of the cyber incident. So one of our country's strategy to improve and strengthen our cybersecurity in the country is to increase our collaboration with other countries, especially to improve our country's cybersecurity capability and also capacity. One of the cybersecurity cooperation which we consider is most influential in our country cooperation is with the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So the regional organizations like ASEAN, it offers a platform for member states to share and also offer regional perspective, exchange information in emerging, also the existing, the emerging threats, and also it helps also to build a confidence building measure and also build the members' cybersecurity capacity. So this regional initiative are very important to facilitate our country and also the other ASEAN member states in responding to future crises in a timely manner, and also build readiness for a safer cybersecurity as a region, especially in the Southeast Asian region. So the ASEAN member states already realized that cybersecurity is a key enabler of economic progress in the ASEAN digital economy. The cybersecurity strategy was introduced in 2017 and now has been the second phase of the strategy, which is 2020 to 2025 strategy. It builds on the foundation laid by the incident response capability, computer emergency response team, and capacity building cooperation, and also considered the rapid cybersecurity challenges landscape to promote a safer regional cyberspace. So in Indonesian case, this kind of strategy activities directly impact to our country's commitment to cybersecurity, such as the CERT coordination and cybersecurity readiness, and cooperation to protect the critical information infrastructure, coordination between organizations to combat the cybersecurity actors, and also promoting our cybersecurity standard and being adopted as a cybersecurity regulation in the country. So this kind of cooperation has proven also to stimulate advancement throughout the ASEAN member states, including our country. In 2017, our global cybersecurity index was scored 47 out of 100 scale. But in 2020, it improved significantly to 95 out of 100. We also saw improvement in most ASEAN countries, and at average, the ASEAN countries have moved from the average of score by 39 in 2014 to the score of 68 in 2020. And obviously, this brought more opportunities for greater intra-ASEAN coordination and also other collaboration, including partnership in the global community. So moving forward from cybersecurity, this collaboration also impacted to other areas of ASEAN community cooperation, especially on the development and integration of its digital economy, which is predicted to add an estimated about $1 trillion to ASEAN GDP over the next several years. And in addition to being vital to the region's economic growth, digital technology have become even more important, especially during the post-COVID-19 pandemic, which can help to recover from the adverse impact of the pandemic. And we continue to leverage the potential of regional digital economy to drive economic recovery efforts. So recognizing the potential of the digital economy to generate opportunity for business and also the community, the ASEAN has agreed several agreements, including the agreement on electronic commerce. It was signed in 2018. The agreement lays this foundation for increased collaboration on e-commerce and also the digital economy issues in the region. And the ASEAN community has developed some other important action plans to facilitate the implementation of the agreement, including the ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance and also the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement. So these initiatives are the ASEAN most crucial digital integration priority, which can significantly improve its regional digital economy and also trade in the future. So based on this experience, allow us to share some insights, especially on how to use some kind of regulatory cooperation in improving cybersecurity, especially in countries having a shared or common interests such as digital economy. I believe that in general, there are exceptions in the WTO, which are also useful that could help countries to balance reducing their cybersecurity risk and threat, but they might not well suited to cybersecurity. So these are some thoughts that our community can do to increase our cooperation in the cybersecurity. Firstly, countries can cooperate under an agreement, should develop a shared understanding of cybersecurity risks. So these countries need to develop a common understanding of the scope or in cyber or digital security and what could constitute cybersecurity measures. Secondly, these countries should also agree to a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. I believe that we all have realized that risk is very crucial to cybersecurity. Assessing this risk and also determine what are needed to reduce this risk requires risk assessment, and also the evolving cyber threats also means that addressing the risk is a dynamic process that requires regular reassessment of the risk. Thirdly, the next one is the country needs to ensure compliance with common cybersecurity standard. So agreeing on certain information security standards can build a common approach to addressing risk based on the best practices, and also tying cybersecurity policy to international standards will also support the development of globally consistent and least threat restricted approach to cybersecurity. And the last one is to enhance information sharing between countries. Real-time sharing of information on the cyber threats and also vulnerabilities between countries is also really, really important to promote awareness and response plan and etc. That's all my presentation. Thank you for having me, and I look forward for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I think there's a lot of rich materials that you have shared in the case of ASEAN cooperation, as well as some of the recommendations that you have flagged at the end. I think a lot of the industry folks will be very happy to see how you have highlighted the risk-based approach, how members should agree to use risk-based approach so that the handling of cybersecurity incidents can be more dynamic and agile, as well as talking about adaptation of international standards. Again, I think that has been repeated quite consistently across many members' presentation. Next, we'll have Veena, our second last presentation. I will beg for everyone's indulgence. I'll finish the presentations, and then after that, we'll have at least 50 minutes to go into Q&A. We'll have Veena from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology from the UK to share their experience in developing product security regulations. And then after that, we'll have the EU. So Veena, please.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
I'm great. I'm just going to see if I can share my slides with you all.
I think it's sharing. So maybe you can.
Sharing?
Yeah, I saw it
Okay.
being shared earlier.
Still sharing? Okay, let me just try again quickly.
I'm fine. That's fine.
Great. Okay. You can see it now? Lovely. Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to come and talk to you here today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but hopefully on another occasion I'll be able to do that. So I'm here today from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and my team works in product security and sits within the Cybersecurity Directorate. And the aim of our department, in our Prime Minister's words, is to make sure that the UK is a country where the next great scientific discoveries are made, and where bright minds and ambitious entrepreneurs turn those ideas into companies, products and services that can help change the world. So DCIT is only part of that story, and it is by working with stakeholders across businesses, science, academia, charity sector, and with other countries that we'll be able to achieve our aims. So turning our attention to the particular work of the team and what I'm here to talk to you about today. The work that DCIT does is part of the UK government's National Cyber Strategy, where our role is in strengthening the UK's cybersecurity system, looking to take the lead in technologies vital to cyber power and building a resilient and prosperous and digital UK. So I wanted to recognise the importance of cybersecurity and trade. Cybersecurity and trade are closely connected. Worldwide use of data by businesses and consumers for communication, e-commerce, and as a source of access to information and innovation has transformed international trade. It's increased global connectivity of businesses, governments, and supply chains. For example, the devices that we use and the services that we access, both in our personal lives and at work, are now such a fundamental part of our modern life, and there are forecasts that suggest we could have almost 30 billion connected devices within the world by 2030. So as global connectivity grows, so does exposure to risks and costs of cyber attacks. We understand that cybersecurity is vital in protecting from unauthorized access and reducing risks that may cause harm to citizens and wider society. So in order to kind of support the protection of consumers and wider society, the UK has introduced a regime to improve the cybersecurity of consumer connectable devices, commonly known as IoT products. And we did this in order to help protect the products that we use and to build collective resilience.
I might have to stop you here. I think you're still at your first slide, but I think you might have moved on to your second or your third.
Sorry. Hold on, second one. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool.
So what we did is we introduced the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act. So it's one of the world's first regimes to require a minimum cybersecurity within consumer products before they're sold within the UK and set in legislation. So this particular bill received royal assent at the end of last year and has become an act, and we've recently published the regulations which include the technical requirements. So just to quickly explain what is included in the legislation before I go through our kind of journey with WTO, the regime will mandate that 3 minimum cybersecurity requirements must be complied with by any manufacturers before they are able to sell these IoT products to UK consumers. I've listed the 3 technical requirements there just to give the audience an idea of the type of requirements that we have included. So these are no default passwords, the availability of a vulnerability disclosure policy, and information on the minimum length of time that security updates will be provided by the manufacturer. There's a brief description of kind of what we've defined as IoT products within our legislation, just at the bottom of that slide. Right, so moving on to kind of how we got to this position and our journey from having an idea and developing a voluntary code of practice all the way through to coming to legislation. So as we know, the Technical Barriers of Trade Agreement encourages the use of international standards, and where these are appropriate to achieve legitimate policy objectives that should be used. And it's important to kind of have a look at what was available and what is needed. So as part of this work, we developed a code of practice for consumer IoT. This was developed with cybersecurity experts, the National Cybersecurity Centre here, and with other cyber experts and government departments. This was published in October 2018, and the work involved conducting a mapping process to identify any existing standards that were used, best practice, looking at what was already effective in terms of industry use and what the gaps were. Existing measures and best practice were consolidated where possible, and the code of practice aimed at addressing any gaps using existing information to develop the voluntary code of practice. The code of practice is regarded as good practice by many countries and has influenced international work, which we're really pleased to see, and we're really kind of happy to work collaboratively with others, learn from others, but also share information that we have. So with the code of practice, it was voluntary, and we were looking to kind of use that to influence a change within industry. However, we realise it's really important to have a clear and consistent set of standards for industry, so they're clear on what is expected to them and to create that minimum baseline. So this led to the development of international standards which could send a signal that there's a consistent kind of set of rules that gives them a safe space to operate and could help, promote growth, which isn't as affected by cyber attacks through the implementation of these kind of cybersecurity requirements. So here, this led to the standard EN 303645. It's an international standard for the cybersecurity of consumer Internet of Things. So this is an outcomes-based standard, and it's published alongside a technical specification, a test specification to help industry to comply. So with this work, we worked with ETSI, industry bodies, other countries to kind of develop this particular standard. It wasn't as effective as we hoped in catalyzing the market to conduct the change and improve cybersecurity to a consistent level. So we decided to legislate. So this takes us into some of the work that we did to collaborate with all our key stakeholders. So this included consultations where the public and industry were invited to provide their views on initial policy ideas, and then the ability to kind of comment and provide feedback on specific policy ideas as well. Right, I'll move on to the next slide. I think we're running low on time, but this work also involved research, and it highlights the need for kind of continued engagement and alignment in the international standards and development space. So we believe the work here aligns with the technical barrier trade agreement elements related to transparency, openness, and international standards through that kind of collaboration, through developing standards together and inviting feedback whilst being very open about what we were looking to do. All right, and this takes me to my very last slide. So just summarising what I've spoken about today, is giving a very brief overview on kind of where we saw the need for intervention, looking at developing a voluntary code of practice, that leading on to technical standards to help protect consumer IoT, which led all the way to legislation that will now be in place within the UK. This involved transparency through comprehensive consultation with stakeholders. This also involved early notification with the WTO to inform them of our plans. And then once legislation was drafted, we notified again to share information with all the members, inviting feedback from them and taking that feedback into account. So this resulted in kind of international collaboration as well. And I'll just finish by talking about some of the international collaboration that we have engaged in throughout this policy development and throughout the development of the regulation. So we have worked with a number of other countries and other governments, as we know that cybersecurity does not stop at the border, and that many of the products that we sold in the UK will be manufactured all over the world, and we want to make sure that others are aware of the legislation that the UK is putting in place and support them to understand how they can provide products to the UK market. So just to give an overview of the international collaboration, we've been supported by the Agile Nations Network Statement of Intent to work together to encourage international alignment and adoption of international standards to improve the cybersecurity of consumer IoT devices. We have had our amplified the international cybersecurity through their commitment to collaborate, share evidence and align approaches. And we've collaborated through the cybersecurity platform with many members from industry and governments, including France, Canada, Senegal, Uruguay, Japan, New Zealand, and the United States, as well as bilateral partnerships, for example, cybersecurity statements with India and Singapore. So we hope that kind of gives other members an idea of the work that we've done, and hopefully through our collective experiences and our work, we can jointly kind of work towards our global cybersecurity aims. And those are the ends of my slides.
Thank you, Veena. And last but not least, we will have Mr. Fabio and also Luis Miguel from the European Commission to talk about the cost of cyber attacks and the risk that an unregulated market poses to businesses. We would also be hearing the main features and objectives of the EU legislative proposals in the area of cybersecurity and the challenges and opportunities they present for product manufacturers, as well as its overall impact on trade. And I believe two of them will have a presentation that's going to last for 7 minutes. And then after that, we'll move into Q&A. So over to you, Fabio and Luis Miguel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Luis Miguel Vega. I'm here together with my colleague Fabio to give you a quick update on the latest legal developments of the European Union on cybersecurity and privacy. I'm going to share my screen with you. I hope it works.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Well, the first topic I would like to talk about is, I would like to present you some figures about cybersecurity. In the European Union, I have to admit that we like a lot the figures and data. We perform a lot of cost analysis before adopting any legal act. But here I don't want to bore you with a lot of figures and data, but I would like to bring your attention to a couple of data that I consider very important and very relevant. The first one is about the cost of security incidents in one of our European Union member states, which is Germany. As you can see on the screen, the cost of this cybersecurity incidents in Germany amounted to 220 billion euros in 1 year. So it's a lot of money. And then regarding small and medium enterprises, the majority of them, about 57%, say that they would simply be destroyed if a cybersecurity attack would happen. So if this happens, it means that these companies would simply go out of business. So cybersecurity, privacy, it's not only about the protection of fundamental rights, it's not only about privacy, it's not only about data sharing, it's also about money, about competitiveness, about business. So in the European Union, we made this analysis some time ago, and we decided to design a roadmap and to draft a couple of pieces of legislation that we are currently adopted in the field of cybersecurity. I would like to tell you that there is an outstanding legislative package adopted by the European Union in the last years. We have addressed different elements of cybersecurity, such as the protection of critical infrastructures, the cyber solidarity, and also the cybersecurity of products. I will not go over all of them, but I would like to introduce you a couple of pieces of legislation that we have adopted and we are going to adopt in the next few months. The first one is the Delegated Act of the Radio Equipment Directive, and the second one is the Cyber Resilience Act. And why we have adopted these pieces of legislation? Because we have identified the gap. The gap is that in the European Union, we had a very comprehensive legal framework for cybersecurity regarding processes management, personal data treatment, and maybe most of you know the GDPR, the General Product Data Protection Regulation. So it's very well known. We have a very consolidated legal framework, but we have identified the gap, which is what concerns products. Because we realized that for products, we didn't have any obligations for the manufacturers of products. Everything was really based on processes and data treatment. So this is why we have adopted, we are working on these two legislative files. I'm going to start by the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Act. For those that you are not familiar with that, the Radio Equipment Directive is the main piece of legislation in Europe that imposes requirements for the placing on the EU market of radio equipment and wireless devices. And we have selected this piece of legislation because it gave us an opportunity to activate what we call a delegated act directly by the European Commission. And we have imposed requirements on the cybersecurity and protection of networks and on the use of network resources to avoid the misuse of network resources. Then we adopted another requirement to protect the user's privacy, especially in what we call internet-connected radio equipment, toys, wearables, in other words, all the categories of products that we consider that were more relevant and more affected by any potential cybersecurity attack. And finally, protection from monetary fraud on these categories of radio equipment. As you can see, the scope is very broad and it addresses the highest threats. It was the first step. This Commission delegated regulation is already adopted in the 2022, and it will be applicable next year. As I said before, it's the first time that we are imposing obligations on manufacturers of devices. I would like to highlight that this piece of legislation, the scope is basically covers radio equipment, wireless devices, and we can understand that the majority of digital products that are subject to any critical attack, cybersecurity attack or any threat may be covered by these categories of wireless products. So we consider that it was a very good first step. Now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague that will give a presentation on our next step, the next milestone of the European Union, which is the Cyber Resilience Act.
Thank you, Luis Miguel, and good afternoon, everyone. Against the background that we have described in the first slide, which is a background of widespread risk and also economic danger for businesses, the Commission on 15 September 2022 presented the Cyber Resilience Act with the idea of reducing this kind of cybersecurity risk. So for the first time, it was provided a comprehensive framework with accountability provisions for manufacturers and also a coherent cybersecurity framework. In fact, the two main policy problems that were detected were a general lack of accountability of product manufacturer and a lack of transparency vis-a-vis consumers who could not select the most secure products. The intention of the Cyber Resilience Act is to address these two issues that also pose a threat to product trade and enable consumers to rely more safely on consumer products at all levels, at the same time make manufacturers more accountable, resulting in a general environment of characterized by more trust in products. Next slide, please. So the question that we have in the face of the Cyber Resilience Act is how we should look at it. I mean, it is just a new regulation by the European Union burdening business and making product trade more difficult, or there are also benefits. Yeah, the way we like to think about the CRA is like a new measure, certainly, but one that entails a small step for manufacturers and a giant leap for mankind. Next, please. And we see in this slide that actually the Cyber Resilience Act is not about building Rome in one day. In fact, there is certainly a compliance step that manufacturers shall take, but it's not a step from ground level. This is because the Cyber Resilience Act builds on the red DA that we've just presented, but also on the new legislative framework, which is the typical legislative framework that applies in the EU for consumer products. It also needs standards to be fully implemented, but it will be on already build on already existing standards, thus limiting also the time necessary to fully implement the provision and the standards that are associated to these provisions. On the other hand, in terms of leap for mankind, if you want to call it that way, we think the Cyber Resilience Act pays a significant dividend to everyone in terms of innovation, because only secure products can provide a solid basis for innovation. It pays a dividend in terms of consumer trust. And once consumer trust exists on the market will also be more open, with trade flowing more seamlessly, and also will benefit from harmonized rules. And overall, the Cyber Resilience Act is inspired by administrative efficiency, because it recognizes the role of self-assessment by manufacturers in cases where the risk is limited. And now I leave to Luis Miguel to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Just to conclude, my last slide is on standards. I would like to say a couple of words on that. Just to finish, we have discussed a lot in this committee. I have heard very interesting ideas on standards. Just let me share with you how we see the standards and the roles and benefits in the standardization developments, and also in the product legislation in Europe. The Red Delegated Act that I presented before will be implemented through product standards, and the Cyber Resilience Act, which is the evolution of the Red Delegated Act, will be also implemented by both products and process standards, because the scope is much broader. Regarding standards, I'm going to be very clear with you. In the European Union, we do not oblige the manufacturers to use standards. We are, let's say, more open, more neutral. We leave freedom to the manufacturers to select any technical specification they wish to demonstrate conformity with the legal requirements. But there is a big difference here, is that in Europe, we have something called harmonized standards, European harmonized standards in support of the EU legislation. And in this case, when the manufacturer uses these harmonized standards, then he or she benefits from the presumption of conformity. So in this case, what we are really saying is that the manufacturer, when they use harmonized standards in Europe, they don't really, we take for granted that they comply with the legal requirements, so they don't really have to demonstrate that they comply with the EU legal framework. So this is why we consider that even if the standards are always voluntary in Europe, they are a very interesting tool for manufacturers to perform the conformity assessments. Of course, we understand that standards create a level playing field for manufacturers in different markets. They are a very powerful tool to increase the competitiveness of the industries. Actually, the European Commission has adopted last year the strategy on standardization, very interesting also. But there is a big difference, because, well, I have heard a presentation before from IEC, very interesting. There is a difference in Europe. Of course, we are not trying to invent the wheel. Our European standardization organizations are taking as a reference the standards that have been adopted, or they are being adopted at international level by IEC and other international organizations. We are not reinventing the wheel, as I said. But here in Europe, we have specific rules, for example, when it comes to objectivity, verifiability, the standards. As we are giving legal effects to the manufacturers with the use of standards, they have to be objective, verifiable. This is a very important challenge, because standards in cybersecurity are quite new topics. They are not as deterministic as in other fields. So we are intensively working on that to have our standards compatible, interoperable with international ones, with one very important objective, which is to avoid any barriers to trade. I finish here. Thank you very much on behalf of the European Union for giving us the opportunity to participate in this committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabio, and thank you, Luis Miguel, for your presentation. We've now reached the Q&A section. I'll open the floor to any questions or comments from the audience. And maybe since the members have done their presentation, I would just want to go back to our private sector stakeholders again. Now that you have listened to the presentation, any comments or reactions from your side? Maybe I'll start with Mike again. Mike.
Everything I've heard really reinforces the idea that we need more collaboration, and the best way to collaborate, the best way to create a level playing field is to work together with the international standards organizations, IEC, ISO, and ITU.
Jackie, next we'll have you to share your comments and reactions, if any.
Thank you very much. I found it very informative, and I think this is exactly when we talk about standards, it's that leveling of the playing field in ensuring that we get to a point that we can deal with this global world of cyberspace. So definitely very informative and reassuring to see that there is a legislative, a regulatory, but also a practical approach that is suggested by the regulators. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm glad that you find the presentations reassuring. And next time we'll have Jonathan, followed by Nandini.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question for both the EU and China, mainly for China. I think the EU answered it. So China has put forward relatively prescriptive mandatory requirements in this space, GB 4250 and GB 450. So my question to China is the extent to which these are based on international standards, or whether you're doing something new. The EU, I think, gave a very helpful comment that they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They are referencing international standards where available, but is that the case in the Chinese case? And second set of question also for both the EU and China. I understand that one of the groups that you've set up in the EU, the Radio Equipment Directive, does not allow participation by non-EU headquartered companies. If that's true, you comment on why that might be the case. And the same in China with TC 260. I understand most of the work there is also not open to foreign participants. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Nandini, I'm not sure if you're connected. I see that you have added a comment in the chat that your internet is dropping. But I was asking about if you have any reactions to what the members have presented earlier. If not, maybe I'll hand the floor over to China first to respond to the questions that Jonathan has posed. Jiefu or Tian or Huirong, if you have if you'd like to respond to the question that Jonathan has raised in terms of how you see China's sort of cybersecurity standards being aligned with what we are seeing in terms of international standards, and whether you deem it prescriptive or there's another way of looking at it.
So for the, I think open for the international standards and national standards for China security aspect, I think we have close relationship, and we have deeply participating ISO IEC and ITU SG 17's standardization work. And for TC 260, I think we also have some mechanism that different kind of manufacturers and enterprises can take part in and discuss about the standardization. So maybe there's the information I could share. Thank you.
Thank you, Huirong. Just wondering if Jiefu, you want to jump in to also add on to the response, or are there any other questions from the floor? Please raise your flag as well. the US, please.
Just to the extent, and in following on to Jonathan's question, but to the extent that you're developing national or regional standards in the cybersecurity frameworks or in accordance with the acts that have been discussed in the TBT committee, are you notifying those mandatory standards to the WTO? That's an open question for the speakers.
Thank you. Maybe we can go in the reverse order. We'll start with the EU. I believe they did.
Sorry, I had a connection issue. I don't know if I had to reply.
No, you're on right now.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Indeed. Let me just clarify because I think you you made a reference to the expert group on radio equipment. The expert group on radio equipment is the advisory group of the European Commission for the development of the Radio Equipment Directive. So in this expert group, there are participants from member states of the European Union, but also private associations that advises us on their let's say the situation of the market and the needs for the developments of the Radio Equipment Directive. In this respect, we are dealing with sensitive topics such as cybersecurity, and we are not limiting the participation of any association in the expert group on radio equipment. I would like to make it clear. The European Union is a very open organization, and in this respect, we hear everyone. The only limitation we have recently introduced because of the sensitiveness of the topics that we are discussing is about the representatives of the members in the meetings of the expert group, and the representatives are simply the persons that participate in the meetings. But in this case, the person have to be employed by European companies, companies based on the European Union. But in any case, as I said, we are not limiting the participations of the associations that can cover companies or any other entities that are not specifically placed in Europe. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis Miguel. I'm not sure if he answered your question. If not, then are there any other questions from the floor? I'd like to gather a few more questions before I take them back to the speakers. I suspect we all had a very long day, and so the silence. But I do have a very, I do want to ask actually China another question, because you raised earlier that, you know, talking about the different levels of cybersecurity regulations and standards in terms of having a national sort of level of framework, regional and local. How does that actually apply in China's context?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairperson. And I will start responding your question by, I think I have had enough information, and I think I've had good responses from the previous speakers on this topic, on the question I was actually asking. And regarding the regarding how these different levels of the standards, don't think I have the answer for now. It's a question that I would like to find out as well. And however, as the Chinese speaker previously just said, and we are participating in different standardization organizations on an international level, such as the 3 Is, as ISO, IEC, and ITU. And we are also participating in the when I say we, I mean there are companies from China that are participating in this kind of standardization organizations, and also including the European standardization organizations, and also some other regional groups as well. And so that would be the general picture of this participation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the response. Sorry to put you in the spot, and I see US flag again. US, please.
Thank you to the moderator. And I'd just like to clarify my question to China. And we're thrilled that you're participating in all the international standards organizations, but if there's a national standard that's mandatory, then it's required to be notified. And many other members notify these types of standards. The same is true with a regional standard. If it's mandatory, it should be notified to the WTO for a notice and comment period. And that's why I asked the question, not about your participation in international standards, but your participation, how you're notifying national requirements when there are mandatory standards. Thank you.
Thanks, US. I think in addition to that, I just want to sort of maintain that the floor is still open. So if there are any other questions that can bundle together, I'll be more than happy to have them. But otherwise, China, would you like to have the floor?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks the question from United States about the notification requirements on mandatory standards of China. Actually, according to China's new standardization law, actually, all the mandatory standards will be notified to WTO for comments. Thank you.
Thanks for the direct answer to the US question. And I'm curious if any other member would like to have the floor. Don't want to hold people back unnecessarily. And if there's nothing else, I might just end it here, if that's okay. So maybe I'll hand the floor over back to the chair for any closing remarks.
All right. Thank you very much. It's indeed been a long day. I'd like to give big thanks to Francis and to Wei for their excellent work in moderating these 2 thematic sessions, and also particular thanks for your effective time management, which also allows us to finish a few minutes early. I'd like to thank all the great speakers and delegations for their valuable inputs and different perspectives, and also big thanks to the Secretariat for your hard work, and also to the interpreters. It was indeed very exciting to learn about more about regulatory challenges, opportunities in the area of intangible digital products and cybersecurity from policymakers, standards bodies, the private sector, and other stakeholders, and also how that links to the TBT agreement and the work in the TBT committee. So without further ado, big thanks for these very productive and engaging sessions. Delegates, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at our regular session starting at 10 a.m. In the Council Room 2 and on Interprofy. So have a great evening, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good job.
Work very closely with your colleagues.
Yeah. I was like, no.